Demons. They're big, they're scary, and they're more than anything else, a problem. No matter what any insane followers of chaos tell you, or what some madman believes is possible when it comes to dealing with them, you don't want demons around. The best case scenario is that no one wins, including the demon. The worst case scenario is you lose and the demon wins. Enjoy the everlasting torment of your eternal soul, bozo, because you're not getting let go from its clutches. But there's tiers to this sort of thing. No demon is a welcome sight, but some are a lot more unwelcome a sight. A bloodletter is bad for anyone within the immediate vicinity. You're gonna get a bit of a temper from their aura, and you're probably soon to die. Same for the other gods' demons, right? A plague bearer means everyone in your town has diarrhea of the torrential variety. A bloodthirster is bad for everyone within the local county, and a great unclean one usually results in mass quarantining and even more massive quantities of diarrhea. The greater demons of chaos are some of the most useful tools at Chaos and GW's disposal, because both in and out of universe you have suddenly found the main problem of the story. You found the main problem of the tabletop match, for that matter. So join me today as we take a more chaotic bent to Warhammer this day. From Warhammer Fantasy, Age of Sigmar, and of course to 40k, the greater demons of chaos are always a scary thing to see show up. Let's see what these guys are all about, and just how much of a problem they really are. But before we talk about the warp, did you know Mother's Day isn't all that far off? It's never too early to get you something for your mom, and you could do no better than Raycon and their Everyday Earbuds, the sponsor of this video. There's a lot of features anyone can appreciate about the Everyday Earbuds, moms included. You want battery life? Have these bad boys got battery life? 32 hours of it straight to be precise, and just 10 minutes of charging gives you 90 minutes of that battery life back. Your mom can forget to charge it for a week and she'll be just fine, and I can assemble 100 high elf minis without going insane because I have some quality audio to keep me going. They're a nice purple, the color of magic, and have this nice starry protective case, which is also great because I love space. The power of space can be keeping your everyday earbuds safe. That's some serious protection. That's hardly all the features they have though. Just a few more include the awareness mode for when you need to keep your ears open for the world around you, and the weatherproof and sweat resistant features. Rain isn't going to keep you from getting your tunes, podcasts, or more with the everyday earbuds. And with the ergonomic design, they fit incredibly comfortably in your ear, which is one of the biggest positives you can say about a pair of earbuds. If you'd like to get your mom a special Mother's Day gift, or just get yourself some fantastic earbuds, I've got just the thing for you. Go to buyraycon.com/pancreasnowork to get 20% off site-wide. Brought to you by Raycon. Good quality audio for whatever you're listening to is a must, so get yourself some Raycon Everyday Earbuds today and experience sound like never before. Now then, let's take a peek at the horrors beyond our comprehension. Because of how chaos works in Warhammer, they're even man-made horrors, technically. Greater demons of chaos are, as the name suggests, the mightiest demons of the chaos gods that exist. Though all demons generally tend to serve their gods with equal fervor, more or less, they are undoubtedly the most effective servants they have at their disposal. The following of course applies to all demons of chaos, but greater demons are formed when a chaos god expends just a bit of their power and creates a newly formed demon. These newly born demons have their own consciousness and personality, obviously similar to that of their parent god, but they crucially aren't just an avatar of them. Unless your name is Fabius Bile, in which case demons are something formative emotions that you tell to their face the gods aren't real and they aren't actually sentient. The man is chugging copium, but so is the entire Imperium about the warp during the Great Crusade, so he's hardly alone on that front. At any point, a demon can have their entire being slurped back into their parent god on a whim, which tends to nicely ensure loyalty to their creator. It's obviously not 100% foolproof. Scarbrand tried to take an axe to Khorne for as foolish a decision that was, but in almost every single case, the demons are hardly going to be gunning against their parent deity. The only en masse exception I can think of is Age of Sigmar, with all the various Keepers of Secrets that are trying to take Slaanesh's spot, and they can only do that because Slaanesh is locked in magical super jail and can't do anything about it at the moment. As with all other demons, they do have true names that can be used to gain a measure of power over them. If you somehow acquire a demon's true name, they're of course going to try and break your hold over them in whatever way they can, but having that true name means you've got a strong chain around their neck in essence. Don't loosen your grip on the chain, and you should be okay. Banish them with it, enslave them if you're feeling confident. The demon's true name gives you a whole lot of power over them. Greater demons, though, have tricky names. Lesser demons have names that can just be hard to pronounce and find out. A random demonette might have a name like which is a mouthful to properly say. The name's gotta be perfectly pronounced and known, and if you flub a syllable because it looks like they slammed their head on a keyboard for their name, you might be in trouble trying to bind them. Greater demons, meanwhile, have names that include things like the sound of 1,000 cannons going off, as well as a spell that makes your testicles explode as part of the name. And of course, all the while you might be trying to say their full name to gain power over them, they are presumably trying to keep you from finishing that little ritual. Alternatively, the other demons present are trying to stop you from saying saying it. Greater demons rarely show up alone. Usually when they breach into the real world, a whole horde of lesser demons jumps over with them, which is part of the reason they're such a problem. It isn't just, I now have to deal with Kairo's Fate Weaver, it's I now have to deal with Kairo's Fate Weaver and his 1,000 backup dancers that I'll split in half when I kill them. All demons, assuming they aren't sucked back into their god, are truly immortal. Killing one just banishes it. It requires truly powerful magic or the presence of the divine to fully kill any demon. Greater demons can still be vulnerable to those things, but they require it to a much higher degree, and even banishing them normally requires a truly breathtaking amount of effort. While reciting scripture to Sigmar or the Emperor can be enough to banish a bloodletter, it takes proper artifacts and sites of holy power to banish greater demons. This can be seen with Nakari, who out of all the demons present was the only one strong enough to remain whole in the presence of the Shrine of Assyrian. It still burned them when they touched it, but its presence alone wasn't enough to banish them. Until Tyrion and Teclis did their thing, of course, then they were properly banished. They are, of course, depending on the setting, beings made of either magic or raw emotion given form in the warp, based on if you're in Fantasy or 40k. We'll go for 40k first because Fantasy and AOS largely work the same. Not that there's too many differences between Chaos and all the settings, but there are a few. In 40k, Demons of Chaos are the manifestation of the warp's reflections of the Materium. When you get angry, and I mean incredibly, unreasonably angry, you might inadvertently give Khorne a bit of a boost, and out pops a new bloodletter. When you and your entire town get that angry, that's how we get a Bloodthirster. Because this also works with the general concept of war, every time you go to fight Khorne, Khorne gets more demons. Big E can give demons a true death as well as a few other methods, and you can always throw one of them in a Necron Tesseract and that'll keep them contained for as long as you have the box somewhere secure, but for what most people can do, they're a lot harder to deal with permanently. Even for just banishing them back to the warp instead of truly killing them, a Lasgun is only going to be so effective against a Bloodthirster. That's why the proper noun for a group of guardsmen is a horde of guardsmen after all. They know one Lasgun is worthless, but 1,000 of them is a whole lot of worthless getting thrown at you all at once. Obviously, they're a threat if you're within the warp because that's their home, but as with their lesser kin, greater demons aren't really an issue for the average person on a day-to-day basis. Even for most Imperial ships like trader vessels, a greater demon isn't a common workplace hazard, if for no other reason than their patron god would like some of their strongest servants to be doing something more productive than harassing random cargo haulers. As a result of being so powerful, greater demons require a massive concentration of warp energy to even breach into real space, let alone maintain themselves there. The most obvious solution to this issue for them is of course Psykers, human ones to be precise, because most humans have a, shall we say, poor grasp of their powers. Even trained humans are pretty shaky at it because humans aren't really meant to be Psykers quite yet. Psychic Awakening and the Emperor's visions all point to mankind evolving to that point, so eventually mankind might be similar to the Eldar if to a lesser degree, but it's very much not at that point yet. As a result, they wait for some unsuspecting Psyker to lose control and hijack their body, possessing them and using them as a conduit to exist in real space. Alternatively, if the situation requires something more impactful but less long-lasting, they might explode into a portal for demons to cross through. This might let them pour directly into real space, but lacking both a host as well as a sustaining source of psychic power, they won't be around for that long. Greater demons can also be summoned through rituals that are suitably messed up and appropriate for the one you're trying to summon. A lesser demon of Khorne might just need a couple of bloody sacrifices. If you want a Bloodthirster, you're sacrificing an entire postal code worth of people at least. It's the same across the board, although if I'm being honest, I also like to imagine that summoning Tzeentch demons is entirely random in what's required and is more based on how they're feeling at a given moment. Maybe you need to overthrow an entire regime and change your whole society for a Lord of Change to even notice you. Maybe the only change required to summon one is changing your socks. The other, far more canonical case of not really needing all that much to summon a greater demon is if your name is Thanquol, in which case, you can summon Scarbrand by accident. Just a goof, you know, just a little oopsie daisy. I love that rat. Greater demons tend to cause more issues than just the obvious one of their presence. Like, yeah, a greater demon is a hazard to anyone in the immediate area. That's a no-brainer. They tend to also have a detrimental effect to the very planet they're on as well, though, they're through mere presence. Anyone immediately around a Bloodthirster is driven to rage, while a Lord of Change can cause the entire countryside they're in to begin rapidly mutating as the warp seeps off them. And of course, the good old-fashioned insanity that comes from looking at the raw essence of the warp given form in these demons and the portal they come through. Actually quite nicely shown in Space Marine 2 with the Guardsman, once the plot twist that isn't a plot twist because it was in the marketing happens.
Drips from his eternal eyes in glistening jewels of ecstasy, shimmering visions of unending.
They as often as not also kill the people that summon them, because summoning and controlling are two different things. I can let loose a rabid animal into a building. That doesn't mean once it's out I can get it back in the cage, or that it won't maul me too. It's kinda like that. Containing a greater demon and the warp rift that summoned them is naturally the highest priority for the Imperium as well as any other non-chaos factions present, which has varying degrees of difficulty based on the faction in question. The Tau are probably the worst off because of them trying to redo the Imperial truth and being in denial about reality, although since they've much less of a presence in the warp, it's slightly more feasible for them, and railguns are damn strong even against demons. The Imperium has everything from hordes of guardsmen to space marines to even the Grey Knights if it's bad enough to throw at the problem, and there's always good old-fashioned exterminatus if nothing else works. The Eldar can do anything from seal the rift if it threatens them, to just walking into the webway and letting it be someone else's problem. You might call that cowardice. I say you try fistfighting a Bloodthirster first before you can judge them for not wanting to do so. And of course, the Necrons and Tyranids can just turn a warp rift off. The Shadow and the Warp and Necron pylons are quite good at making even greater demons dissipate into nothingness. If given time and the opportunity, though, they can easily lay waste to an entire planet on their own. A Space Marine chapter known as the Meta Marines, who were no doubt famed for switching their tactics based on what army list was winning the most tournaments at the time, once dealt with a chaos cult doing all sorts of chaos cult shenanigans. In desperation, the cult summoned the Bloodthirster Angrath, who proceeded to kill every single thing on the Hive world over the course of 7 years all by himself. The dude must have been killing 100 people per axe swing to match the population growth of a hive, let alone outpace it, but that's the kind of stuff greater demons can do. They may even go so far as to drag a planet into the warp with them, or surround it in the warp, essentially allowing them to exist with impunity on that world. The one upside that does apply to all Warhammer settings to some degree, but mostly 40k in my mind, is that while they're in the Materium, they are somewhat subject to the laws of the Materium. In a grander, scientific way, demons in real space suddenly go from a realm of dreams made real to a realm of gravity and physics and all that boring stuff we have to deal with. Their forms become much more solid and physical, still made out of warp stuff, but no longer ephemeral and subject to change on their whims. Their mere thoughts are no longer enough to change the world around them. They now have to actually put the work in themselves to do so. In a more practical sense, they're now vulnerable to being shot. Greater demons are strong, but 20 Baneblades all pointed right at one are a lot stronger. So I do stand by my statement that outright defeating chaos is quite difficult, but shooting it in the face until it can't bother you for a little while is a lot easier. The Great Rift, of course, made greater demons a far more common occurrence in the galaxy, at least where it borders real space. Whereas once they required great rituals, now sometimes they can just show up if you're in the wrong place. Over in Fantasyland, it is, like I said, similar, but instead of being emotional resonances or whatever, demons are made of the raw magic of the realm of chaos. Glowing from the poles, magic suffuses most of the Warhammer world to varying degrees at any given moment. When the winds of magic are weak or calm altogether, demons for the most part cannot materialize in the mortal world unless a ritual is performed, and they won't be around long even in that case. When the winds of magic are strong, however, they have a much easier time being summoned and can sustain themselves far longer. In places where the barrier between the realm of chaos and the normal world are particularly weak, they can also just show up there, too. Yvres is a great example of this, since after Grom smashed it up, the Waystone network wasn't strong enough to totally stabilize magic in the region anymore, so sometimes demonettes and keepers of secrets and whatnot just make an appearance. You can also find plenty of them hanging around outside the polar chaos gates, but that's less surprising. The portals to hell have demons around them, who could have guessed? There does seem to be a lot more ways to deal with demons in fantasy than in 40k, and part of that is the far greater presence of gods in the setting. In 40k, it's mostly just Big E going against them, with some occasional jabs thrown in by deities like Kegarak or Iniad. In fantasy, you've got the various human pantheons, the dwarf and elf gods, Nagash. Nagash choked out a Bloodthirster in the end times when chaos was at its most powerful. It ain't even a thing. Obsidian is also apparently a stone that completely counteracts magic. Demons being made at magic, you can theoretically throw a rock at a demon and it'll vanish. And of course, if your name is Eltharion the Grim, you can just throw demons into your dungeon for all time. Into Arkham you go, eternal and powerful greater demon from beyond all I know and cherish. Also helping demons not being able to manifest is the vortex at the center of Ulthuan. Created when chaos first breached the world, the elven vortex drains magic from it. Since it drains the magic in the world, that means demons can't just show up wherever, and is indeed part of the reason you need complicated rituals to begin with. It isn't perfect at draining magic, so sometimes there is enough in an area that the weather forecast calls for Scarbrand, but for the most part, it does the job well. All of this said, greater demons in fantasy are still a massive threat. Felix beamed one in the head with a sacred dwarf hammer with the heavily implied assistance of a god, be it Sigmar or a dwarf one, and the thing came back a few decades down the line for revenge. It didn't work out for the demon because it came back for revenge on Gotrek and Felix, and Gotrek and Felix are Gotrek and Felix, but it shows how damn hard it is to truly kill them. And over in Age of Sigmar, they're largely the same as they are in fantasy. The biggest difference is that they don't struggle nearly as much as sticking around in the mortal world as they do in fantasy or 40k. The mortal realms are all made with the essence of the winds of magic, and since this makes them inherently magical, demons have almost free reign to run around all over the place once they're summoned. Depending on the realm, this will be easier or harder, of course. Light magic and therefore Heish is inherently anathema to demons due to how ordered it is, and the Lumineth will doubtlessly intervene regardless. If they show up in Azir, meanwhile, that's the one place where Sigmar himself might show up to personally throw down with them since it's his front lawn, so they tend to not do that very often. There's a list of people that Sigmar can't just instantly obliterate, and even your average greater demon isn't on the list. Something that exists technically in all settings, but is most prominent in recent memory in Total Warhammer, are exalted greater demons. Essentially, they're better greater demons, given a stronger position in their god's hierarchy, with predictably more power to go with it. They don't come up very often anymore, but at the very least, in Total Warhammer, they're what you get when one of your standard demon generals levels up enough times to turn into an exalted greater demon to lead your armies with. Once upon a time, an exalted demon was a fusion of a mortal and a demon, not a possession but a full-on fusion, but that's not been a thing for some time as far as I can tell. As an aside before we get to the types, I have a theory as to why greater demons in 40k require either the heaviest of artillery or a moderately important named character to take down, while in fantasy some conscripted farmers with about 10 pounds of armor between them can do the same thing. Chaos is all about being affected by the beliefs of mortals, right? And symbolism is a very powerful thing against it. It's why even mere symbols of the Emperor or Sigmar can drive away lesser demons and give an advantage against greater ones. Well, in 40k, it's less personal when the guard opens fire against one. Because they become more subject to actual physical laws, the Baneblade's shot still hurts them, but it's a largely mechanical process. You press the button and the tank fires. There's little personal involvement. It's not strictly speaking you slaying the demon, it's the tank doing it. You're just driving. But in fantasy, that Imperial swordsman is putting his life on the line up close and personal to defend his home country. He doesn't have the finest of weapons and technology to fight with, just a pointy stick. He's fighting the demon one-on-one personally, which is symbolically a lot more powerful than the firing line of lasguns. If he's lucky, he does have a black powder weapon, which compared to a Baneblade or lasgun is still far more involved. You gotta load the powder, jam it in, jam the bullet in, and then you can finally fire. The level of personal involvement against demons is far greater in fantasy than in 40k, making it symbolically more significant, and since the warp reflects this kind of stuff, it translates to your average fantasy fella being more effective than his 40k counterpart. I'm sure the real reason is just GW needs them to be in both settings, so they end up as stronger in 40k because it's a sci-fi setting with a lot crazier stuff in it. But in my own personal explanation, I like to think that the lack of tech means your average Imperial State Trooper or whatever army grunt from another faction is getting more personal with it. And because it's more personal and emotionally powerful, this means them stabbing that spear hits a Bloodthirster harder than a guardsman firing a lasgun does. How about we get into the various kinds of them now? Let's start off with the angry red man himself, Khorne. Bloodthirsters are the leaders of Khorne's forces, beings of pure hate and rage that can bring down entire armies on their own. Be they facing the armies of the Imperium, the mightiest of Stormcast Eternals, or the endless tides of the Skaven, Bloodthirsters show neither fear nor mercy on the battlefield. To slightly backpedal on how strong they are, they do admittedly suffer a bit from Avatar of Cain syndrome. Actually, that comparison fits fairly well, because right after killing one of those, Lorgar then went on to defeat the Bloodthirster Angrath, one of several who competes for the title of the strongest one around. But in all fairness and bias towards the Eldar, this isn't quite as bad as Cain's struggles. An Avatar of Cain is an Avatar of Cain. They're all the same thing by and large. Bloodthirsters are different beings with different strengths and abilities, so them getting regularly dunked on is slightly different than Cain getting regularly dunked on. Bloodthirsters of course thrive in melee combat, but as the largest and in chargest of Khorne's forces, you can find plenty of them that are great at the more logistical and strategic aspects of warfare as well. In fact, you can find entire hosts of those guys. To be specific, there exists within Khorne's domain 8 hosts of Bloodthirsters. Now what exactly every host's purpose or even name is, I couldn't find. I presume this is GW leaving you some room to invent stuff with. That being said, we can actually use these hosts to find out exactly how many Bloodthirsters exist at any given moment, assuming every Bloodthirster is part of a host. There are 8 Bloodthirsters in the first host, known as the Exalted Bloodthirsters. This may be where all the idea of exalted greater demons went with for Khorne, although at least in Total Warhammer that doesn't quite track because you can have more than 8 armies. There's only 8 of these demons, and they are without a doubt Khorne's strongest warriors. They each directly command 8 demons under them in the second host, who themselves command 8 demons directly in the one below, all the way down to the 8th host, which are the Bloodthirsters of Unfettered Fury. Ironically enough, given that name, those demons are the ones that are Khorne's generals. Maybe that's why they're so angry. They just want to smash, but Khorne keeps telling them to build more supply depots like they're playing Hearts of Iron. With the math of each host going downward in rank having 8 times as many as the previous host, we come to a grand total of Khorne having 19,173,960 Bloodthirsters under his command. And for once, I don't think this is GW being bad with numbers. If one Bloodthirster could take down a planet on his own, even if he was one of the mightiest, then all of them at once is game over for the galaxy. Hell, in fantasy, that many Bloodthirsters no doubt outnumbers entire regions of the Empire. At any given moment, a Bloodthirster can challenge another one for their position in the hierarchy, either on the battlefield or within his brass citadel. If the challenger wins, he gets the position of the first guy. If he dies, sucks to be you, bozo. Khorne doesn't care either way, because blood is flowing, which means he's happy. Also, just something I observed, the 8th host being the generals means the Bloodthirster generals outnumber the non-generals by about 5 to 1, which is certainly an interesting strategic choice. Bloodthirsters are all armed with brass armor designed to ward off magic, in addition to just being armor forged by the god of war and therefore good, but the rest of their arsenal is surprisingly varied. The 6th host, the Bloodthirsters of Insensate Rage, wield great axes the size of a castle's gateway. The 8th host, meanwhile, has the classic whip and just normal axe. As normal as you can get with an axe that also has the spirit of a greater demon chained inside of it, which incidentally means either Khorne's forces are regularly turning the other god's greater demons into weapons, or there's double as many Bloodthirsters as I just said. One to hold the axe, and one to be the axe. There's a whole bevy of named Bloodthirsters out there, but let's just go over 3 of them. That's a nice and simple number to keep things at, even if Khorne would probably prefer I do at least 8. First is of course the probably most well-known one between Total Warhammer and TTS, Skarbrand. Skarbrand was/is part of the first host, the strongest by far. He once fought against 1,000 other Bloodthirsters and won. He fought against all of Khorne's foes before and won. He just kept winning and winning and winning until Tzeentch snuck up in his ear and said, "Hey man, you're the one doing all the hard work. Why don't you go challenge your boss?" So he did, and it didn't go well, and then got thrown out of Khorne's realm so hard he flew for over a week straight until he crash-landed, his wings destroyed and his mind stripped of anything but rage. Now he seeks to kill enough things to get back in Khorne's good graces, which will almost certainly never happen, because in Total Warhammer, even if Skarbrand hands him the skull of a god, Khorne still doesn't let him back in. He's got 2 axes, which true to form are made from the essence of a Bloodthirster, and he's a surprisingly eloquent speaker. In Total War, his voice lines are pretty calm, and when Thanquol summoned him on accident, he pretty calmly told the rat that he was his doom. He wasn't, but that's Thanquol. Thanquol can never be killed, he's too funny. The next Bloodthirster is a fella named Angrath. Angrath is a rather sad fella because he tends to lose frequently. He lost at Vrax, he lost against Lorgar of all people, and he of course lost against one of the greatest of them all, Marneus Calgar. I don't hold that one against him though, that's Marneus Calgar. That's the named Ultramarine, you can't hold that against him. While it is a shame, he was at least given a consolation prize of single-handedly killing a hive world over the course of 7 years, as mentioned earlier against the Metamarines, so he's doing better than most Eldar will ever get if nothing else. He doesn't even seem to have been banished at the end of it, he just ran out of things to kill and went home. He's not really super interesting, but he does have a model, so that's something. And the final Bloodthirster, Kabanda. Famous chiefly for his rivalry with Sanguinius and the Blood Angels, Kabanda is also among the first host alongside Angrath. He also tends to lose fairly often, at least in 40k, but his defeats are against Sanguinius or the Grey Knights, so it's a bit more forgivable. Kabanda's track record, to speed through some of it, is breaking Sanguinius' legs before getting shut into the warp by him, fighting him again during the Siege of Terra only for Sanguinius to break his back like Bane did to Batman. He got killed by Grey Knights once, the Sanguinor defeated him before, and during the opening of the Great Rift when Hive Fleet Leviathan was tearing down on Baal, the Rift overtook the Hive Fleet. When things calmed down a bit, there was nothing but millions of Tyrannid skulls arranged in Kabanda's symbol, because it's not like only I can defeat you or anything, Blood Angel-sama. Funnily enough, immediately before this happened, Dante actually gave the order to summon him onto Baal so that he couldn't arrive on his own accord, and because the ritual to then banish him got messed messed up, he was instead catapulted into space, where he was angry he couldn't fly. Get Isaac Newton, bozo. In fantasy, meanwhile, Kabanda's greatest appearance was during the End Times. Kairos Fate Weaver failed to take Averheim, so Archaon cut his head off and used the blood to summon Kabanda instead. Kabanda proceeded to butcher his way across the Empire, taking on nearly all the incarnates at once. When Caradrian, the incarnate of the Wind of Fire magic, blasted him in the face with the entire Wind of Akshi, he just tanked it and then killed the elf. The only people to give him an actual fight were Nagash, such as his power, and Sigmar, who finally got rid of him before Archaon proceeded to then get rid of the setting. Meh. Moving on to Tzeentch, we have the Lord of Change. Lords of Change are big birds. That's it, roll credits. Temptation to actually commit to that bit aside, a Lord of Change is more or less the strongest generic magic user in any of the Warhammer settings. Certain named characters like Magnus, Teclis, and Nagash may outpower them, but take a random Lord of Change and a random Psyker or Wizard, and it's game over for the person who isn't a bird. This once upon a time wasn't necessarily the case, because Firstborn Slann are made of 110% concentrated bullshit, but they're all dead except for one who decided death was inconsequential, and he has a name, so it's a moot point. In theory, Lords of Change can see pretty much everything ever. Kairos Fate Weaver can do even more than that, which we'll get to later, but according to lore, Lords of Change only ever don't see coming if Tzeentch specifically intervenes to prevent them from predicting and seeing an outcome. Which, on paper, means they're omniscient and could never lose. But allow me, for once in the history of the Warhammer fanbase, to offer an alternative to the classic line of everything is canon, not everything is true, that isn't just ignoring something GW did that you don't like. Tzeentch is, among other things, the god of lies. It comes part and parcel with scheming. Sometimes you gotta lie to get to higher places. Now again, Tzeentch supposedly knows all, and if he wanted to win, he could, but he doesn't, because if he won, he'd lose, because there's no one to scheme against. But tell me, viewer, who do you think benefits from you thinking Tzeentch is all-powerful? What god could possibly want to lie about Tzeentch and his demons being all-knowing at any given moment? Yeah, I do not buy into Lords of Change and Tzeentch as a whole being basically capable of winning whenever he feels like it. Every passage along the lines of Tzeentch is all-knowing is in-universe propaganda. If it sounds like I'm shitting on him and Lords of Change, that's because I am, but in fairness, even without the all-knowing thing in play, they aren't exactly weak. Just being near one is the kind of thing that makes you spontaneously mutate into a chaos spawn, and when they start actually slinging spells, it's game over. They are almost certainly better at magic than you are, so if you don't specifically have the tools to counteract them, you're done for. Famous Lords of Change I care to bring up are of course Kairos Fate Weaver and Atos Rao Keres. Kairos was once a normal Lord of Change until Tzeentch got angry he couldn't see the future with 100% clarity, so he tossed Kairos into the Well of Eternity, some weird portal black hole thing in the center of reality. Kairos came out with 2 heads and visibly aged, which honestly that second thing is more shocking than the 2 heads because demons are immortal. They're not supposed to get old, but Kairos got old. He can see the entirety of the past and future at the same time, which goes beyond what you might think, because in 40k at least, there isn't necessarily just one future. It's branching, that's the whole gimmick of Farseers. Which means Kairos sees infinity, every single possible branching timeline from major ones where a faction might be destroyed to a small one where you put your left shoe on first instead of the right one. One head always tells the truth, one head always lies. Unless you're Lorgar being told you can either get revenge on Guilliman or win the Horus Heresy. Both heads were telling him the full story in that case. When he's not on a mission of some sort, there's 81 Lords of Change that write down every single thing he says, most of which is nonsense, but every now and again a secret of the universe leaks its way out. He's trying to tempt the Blood Drinker Space Marine chapter to come to Chaos by way of offering them a funny ritual to maybe avoid the Black Rage, and when Guilliman came back, he captured Guilliman only for that to not stick. And as mentioned earlier, he failed to capture Averheim in Warhammer Fantasy, and was used to summon a far more direct demon instead by Archaon. Much like a lot of things related to Tzeentch, he doesn't do too much, but he's still fun, if only because who doesn't like the old one guy only speaks the truth, one only lies gimmick. Although in his case, it's much less straightforward. I don't think it's ever been confirmed that which head lies and which one is honest is always the same, so you have that to worry about when you're asking him a question. Because he knows all about the past and all about the future, he also knows what exactly you're going to ask him, so good luck trying to trick him that way too. Really the only way I can think to win at his little game is to give him a question that's just a 50-50 answer. For example, let's say you're an Inquisitor and there's a Chaos Warband you've been tracking. You know they're going to attack one of 10 sectors. Do not ask what kind of forces are they going to bring, because that is far too open-ended a question. The lying head will easily come up with a convincing answer that's still ultimately wrong. What you should ask is quite simply, which sector are they going to attack? One head will be honest, one will not, but now you can narrow down the sectors you need to worry about to just 2 instead of the 10 you had reason to believe were at risk beforehand. You also then have to worry about Kairos killing you immediately after you're done asking him stuff, but hey, that's the chance you take with demons. The other one I like is one named Atos Rao Keres, and there is nothing clever about him. The only thing that makes him significant is that when he's summoned, he kills everything on the planet he's summoned to. He's so paranoid about people knowing his schemes and true name and whatnot that when he's summoned, everyone has to go. That's it. I just find it funny that the Tzeentch demon is the Exterminatus one. Oh, and at one point in 40k, he had a point cost of 1500. Bit pricey, that. Take the smelliest guy you ever met. Now double it. Double it again, double it a third time for good measure, and then just to be safe, double that smell about a dozen times more. Now you have the Great Unclean Ones, because with a name like that, I'd almost be insulted if you didn't smell like shit. Great Unclean Ones are all made in the image of Papa Nurgle himself, and much like their dear old dad, these fellows are so jolly that the joy is positively infectious. When they take to the battlefield, they come forth with the biggest of smiles as they bash your head in with a bell to herald the arrival of Nurgle's gifts. The gifts, mind you, are far worse than the bell. It's probably quicker to list the amount of things in Warhammer that can't smash you into paste in one hit. The bell isn't that special. The mere presence of a Great Unclean One, however, sickens those around it, as plague chokes the life out of anyone facing it. Sickness spreads out across the land, and even if the demon is dealt with, the area is almost certainly doomed to face pestilence on a mass scale. Quarantining off an area a GUO has been to is necessary for whoever controls the region. In spite of the medicine being worse in fantasy, it might actually be better off in this case though. Nurgle's plagues are equal parts pathogen and demon magic, and because of that, the priestesses of the goddess Shalia can pray away the sick more effectively than a lot of medicine might otherwise. Great Unclean Ones aren't stopping there when it comes to being disgusting though. Dirty and sick isn't enough for them because they can actually have children, and yeah, it's gross. Nurglings sometimes pop off of them, which they incidentally can throw as a missile weapon, and at least one Nurgling, Kugath, became a Great Unclean One after swallowing the contents of Nurgle's cauldron. Now, admittedly that was an extreme case because within it was Nurgle's greatest disease yet, but it stands to reason that it's possible Nurglings can grow up to become Great Unclean Ones through similar methods. But you know, that's still not even the grossest way they reproduce. There's a character in Warhammer Fantasy named Orgoth's Demon Spew. He's a champion of Nurgle, which isn't anything too special on its own. But his mom was a witch and his dad was a Great Unclean One, so you know, have fun thinking about the mechanics of that one. The 2 Great Unclean Ones I'll bring up here are Kugath Plaguefather and Rodigus. Kugath is actually fairly different between Fantasy and 40k. In 40k, he's actually quite angsty as opposed to the normal jovial attitude of a Great Unclean One. Like I just mentioned, he was once a Nurgling hanging around on Papa Nurgle's shoulder while Nurgle was cooking up his greatest disease yet when Kugath suddenly fell in. When he fell in the cauldron, he just started drinking and drinking until he'd become a Great Unclean One that embodied the perfect disease. Nurgle loved all this and happily laughed it off, but Kugath was dejected. He robbed Nurgle of his greatest disease yet. He was horrified and ashamed of himself. To make up for it, he's committed himself to scouring the galaxy, searching and experimenting with all sorts of ingredients and victims to try and recreate the perfect pathogen. He's fairly attached from the great game of the Chaos God since he spends a surprising amount of time in the Materium for a greater demon, but since he's making plagues all the time, he's still one of Nurgle's greatest servants. He did get Dirged once, which probably hurt. Dirge isn't the 2D Clone Wars character that Obi-Wan exploded. Turns out that when you eat a Grey Knight, Anvil Thawne to be specific, there's pretty good odds they're just going to give you intense indigestion and crawl their way out of you. Also completely unrelated, but does anyone else hear Anvil Thawne's name and immediately think of Thrawn? It can't just be me. He was also found by Mortarion crying over his origin story, and they bonded a bit over shared parental issues. Don't really have much to say on that one. It's kinda cute, in a really gross way, because it's Mortarion and a Great Unclean One. During the Plague Wars, he actually managed to create something to match Nurgle's greatest disease, the titular Godblight. And it worked pretty well as a demigod blight because it killed Guilliman, but it couldn't quite hurt gods proper because that's when Big E resurrected Guilliman, so it didn't go anywhere. Because he was a bit of a loose cannon and displeased Nurgle during all this, he's lost favor to Rodigus, who we'll come to shortly, and now he's just regenerating in the warp. In fantasy, that swallowing Nurgle's cauldron business didn't happen, or at least I couldn't find a fantasy source for it happening, but he does still travel the mortal world looking for new disease ingredients. He's specifically looking for something to kill gods here, which means it's a shame for him that he can't transfer the Godblight ingredients from 40k. If you win in his Total Warhammer 3 campaign, he does succeed in that though by using Ursun's corpse to make a Godblight, so good on him. He also seems a lot happier in fantasy, or at least in Total War. He's literally the only one in the intro cutscene for all the factions that doesn't harass the advisor. Even the good guy factions throw their weight around a bit. He's been around and about, causing disease and whatnot like all great Unclean ones do. With Total Warhammer 3's launch, we learned that he was apparently involved in a mix of a Nurgle civil war and religious schism, as some other Nurgle demons decided only Nurgle himself should invent new diseases and not his lowly servants, greater demon or no. When they confronted him over this, Kugath unleashed a disease that wasted away even other great Unclean ones. One of the other GUOs survived, but when Kugath gave chase, 3 of the Dragon Children of Cathay burnt them all and sent them back to the Warp. Aside from that, he does pretty standard greater demon stuff. He's attacked Bretonnia, the Empire, the Dwarfs. He really doesn't like the Dwarfs on account of a personal defeat at Karaza Karak, as well as the fact they're damn near immune to all disease. In the end times, he was slain at Altdorf by Lo and Leonkur, and in AOS, he doesn't really seem to be doing all that much. Radagus, meanwhile, is a pretty cheery dude and has similar habits across the settings. He's often called Radagus Rainfather, you see, because he likes to pretend to be an ancient fertility god and give people rain. When some Tau Earthcasts completely failed to get their technology that gave them water working again on a planet suffering from drought, they started praying to the same god the natives prayed to. Initially, the drought ended, and everything was right and well and great all around. Then the planet turned into a bog that was more disease than anything else, and who was actually being prayed to became apparent. He loves to do that kind of little prank. He's also called this because he's surrounded by a hurricane of filth and sewage at all times, appropriately called the Deluge of Nurgle. It heals friendly units and makes enemy units drown in poop. He's become a sort of rival to Kugath. In AOS, he just seems to be the main great Unclean one, and in 40k, he called Kugath out for being a shitter. During the Plague Wars, he managed to set things up so someone discovered evidence of the Imperium Secundus, which can cause all sorts of lovely problems for Guilliman and the Imperium as a whole. Between that and his general success, he's become Nurgle's favorite boy. Nice to see that even if Nurgle is all about love, he and his demons aren't any less immune to the infighting of everyone else in 40k. Second to last, because remember there's still a rat god to talk about, we have the Keepers of Secrets. Keeper of Secret being the name of Slaanesh's greater demons always makes me giggle a bit because you know for a fact they'd be the first people to be spreading gossip about anything. Cheryl's new hairdo is not going 5 minutes without a Keeper of Secrets talking about it behind her back. Aside from that, they're of course, as with all things Slaanesh, seeking the greatest highs to ever be had, corrupting mortals with honey words and magical seduction, and presumably have enough drugs on them at any given moment to slightly buzz Ozzy Osbourne. They are, in all fairness, perhaps the best demons at infiltrating mortals and creating cults. Everyone thinks they'd go for people like Tzeentch in the Schemes to Power, or Khorne in his strength, or even Nurgle for some comfort in despair. But let's be honest, in the settings of Warhammer, the most attractive offer that can be made is someone giving you the chance to just enjoy life for a few minutes. And so Keepers of Secrets sneak into your mind, whispering to you that a little break from work won't hurt. Take an extra few minutes on your smoke break, it won't kill anyone. And while you're at it, that guy over there is smoking something pretty cool. Why don't you go grab some of the wacky tobacco and take a load off? Cut to a year down the line and you're having the kind of sex that doesn't even look like sex anymore, but it sure as hell has a body count. In all settings, they prize elf/Eldar souls beyond all others, both because elf souls burn brighter than other races, and because the Eldar brought Slaanesh about in 40k in particular. In AOS, they actually have quite a bit more to do though, since Slaanesh being imprisoned means a lot of them are looking for her, or trying to take her place with no one to stop them. Now, I can't imagine that will ever happen, because Slaanesh isn't gone, just imprisoned, and she has been affecting the mortal realms more and more as the chains binding her have loosened and broken. But until she's finally free, the Keepers of Secrets are going to enjoy either having no one to answer to, seeking submission to their goddess once again, or trying to climb their way to the top and claim her former throne. Sticking with the number 2, the main Keepers of Secrets I care to talk about are Nakari and Shalaxi Hellbane. We'll do Shalaxi first because we need to discuss the Inari when they come up, and no one enjoys doing that. Shalaxi was made specifically to kill the champions of the other Chaos Gods, and in particular Bloodthirsters. Khorne and Slaanesh are arch rivals, so a KOS dedicated to Bloodthirsters ain't a horrid idea by any means. Twice has Shalaxi fought Scarbrand, although each time the duel was interrupted. One of which involved them being banished by the Grey Knights, which Slaanesh threw a hissy fit over, but apparently she decided Shalaxi was important enough to bring back to screw at the Inari, and unfortunately she's done that quite well. Shalaxi's demon armies and the Inari clashed, and look, I'll be honest with you, it's been some time since I forced myself to read the Inari stuff. But if I remember correctly, she licked a pretty sizable portion of the Eldar to death, which just, come on man, please. Give them some credit, don't lick them to death. In spite of this, her forces were defeated and the Unclean summoned to banish her, which on paper is a Ynnari dub. All of this happened after the Eldar, which had congregated on the world this took place on, Iathglass, had argued for days straight. And this was all sorts of Eldar, mind you. Dark Eldar, Craftworldlers, Exodites, hell, the Harlequins were there too, all working together. But after the Unclean banished Shalaxi, they showed up again for just a second to inform the Ynnari that they weren't fighting them at full power, because at the time of the Ynnari's time in the spotlight, the latest thing GW chose to rip off was apparently Dragon Ball Z. And the Eldar all just believed her, in spite of the fact that Slaanesh can and will lie, and the Eldar are her arch-enemy, and the Ynnari are trying to form a god specifically to kill her. One of two things happened here. One, Shalaxi was telling the truth and the Ynnari really are screwed. Or two, Shalaxi was lying to sow discord, in which case that also worked phenomenally. Given how the Ynnari have been treated as time went on, I have no idea which is true, but both are likely and both are somehow the worst option. Would you rather the Ynnari all be idiots, or would you rather Slaanesh just be able to wipe them out, no issues had? Pick your poison. Anyway, N'Kari's also here. The Total War trailer with them was pretty sick, had like a cross between dubstep and orchestral music, cool as hell. Anyways, N'Kari in old lore was a demon prince, but now they're a greater demon. I like them in Total War because again, cool trailer, but their history seems to be one long losing streak. They were also banished by the Grey Knights, which is nothing worth mentioning, but they were even banished by none other than the Emperor himself at one point. N'Kari did get a win by killing Asserman, the first one to do the Phoenix Lord in fact, but then Drastanta absolutely obliterated them in revenge. Given that Phoenix Lords and demons alike both respawn, this didn't really amount to anything other than humbling Drastanta, which he needed, so hey, that's a dub for the Eldar in a really roundabout way. In fantasy, meanwhile, N'Kari's role is to be the bitch of anyone with the blood of an Aryan in their veins. An Aryan himself fought and banished N'Kari, who indeed was one of the 4 greater demons he fought with the Sword of Cain. Malekith at one point bound N'Kari to him and used the demon to hunt down Tyrion and Teclis, and Tyrion and Teclis have obliterated N'Kari several times. Once they did it nearby the Shrine of Assyrian with help from their god, and once the demon did nearly kill both Tyrion and Alariel, which would have done nicely to clean up the record a bit, then Teclis rolled up and Dr. Manhattaned them to death. It's Teclis, man. He just does that shit. If you aren't a plot-ordained end of the world, Godric or Nagash, he does not struggle. He simply deals with you. Let's leave Slaanesh and talk about something horny in a different way. The Great Horned Rat, of course, has his own greater demons, and in fact he has more than any other Chaos God. While this is almost certainly the same propaganda as with Tzeentch saying he's all-powerful, I like the Skaven, so I'm choosing to believe it here. The propaganda in question is that there's a Verminlord for every Skaven in the mortal world, and I can assure you there is no race more numerous than the Skaven. The fuckers probably outnumber the Tyranids by Age of Sigmar. Verminlords embody the Horned Rat as all the other greater demons embody their respective Chaos Gods, which means in this case, every single Verminlord is a colossal asshole. They're all cowardly, self-serving, and throw mortal Skaven at things they don't like no matter the odds of any Skaven coming out alive. From top to bottom of Skavendom, the bullying never ends. Unlike the other Chaos Gods, though, the demons of the Horned Rat come in more flavors than vanilla. Khorne's host may each have different specialties, for example, but it's all about war. The Horned Rat in all his glory, meanwhile, knows that if you want success, you gotta diversify your assets. And so we have 5 main kinds of Verminlord as a result, all but 2 of which are just rip-offs of another Chaos God's servants. Hey, this is still the Skaven we're talking about. They diversify by stealing other people's stuff. Verminlord Warbringers are the Bloodthirster equivalent. They're the guys kitted out for melee and dishing out the pain up close, and while that sounds rather unskaven, remember that they're mostly using this power to bully mortals that don't have a chance of fighting back. Which, again, usually means they're bothering other Skaven. Verminlord Corruptors, meanwhile, steal from Nurgle, bringing the clan pestilence traditions of disease and decay to anyone within smelling distance. Verminlord Deceivers aren't actually the Tzeentch equivalent, because like Clan Eshin, they're too busy being ninjas, doing the Naruto log teleport thing all over the battlefield, and the Shadow the Hedgehog nothing personal kid right along with it. Verminlord Warpseers are the real Tzeentch equivalent, the mages of the Verminlord who even have crystal balls they can see the future with. Unlike Kairos, however, they can directly weaponize it, because they can throw the orb like a grenade, and anyone who inhales the gas that comes out of it sees all these futures all at once. They then go completely insane, which, if anything, this reminds me of Gojo from JJK. Truly the Great Horned Rat alone is the honored one. And then there's Warpnaw Verminlords, who taught the Skaven how to tunnel in between realities in Age of Sigmar, and indeed spend so much time in those tunnels they're not quite in sync with everything else. It's like their ping is permanently at 400, which works in their favor more often than not. Fighting them is like every time you swear you got a headshot on that guy, but the bullshit lagged helped them out. I swear you guys, it's the game, not me. There's only one named Verminlord I care to discuss, and that's the greatest of them all, Screech Vermin King. In spite of being a greater demon, he's closer to being a demon prince instead. After Nagash was defeated, the Horned Rat was actually happy with the Skaven's progress. Nagash was gone, the Skaven were flourishing in that awful Skaven way they do. Times were good. Then the Skaven's nature reasserted itself, and any momentum they had going for them was halted by their infighting. It got so bad that the Horned Rat grabbed the 12 Skaven that made up the Council of 13 in the mortal world and threw them in a pit in the realm of ruin. All of them naturally blamed each other for this predicament, and the only thing they had for nourishment was the scraps of failed schemes and plots. No, I don't know what that means, don't ask. After God knows how long, because this was in the realm of chaos where time is a suggestion, the Horned Rat checked back in on them to find they had fused into a horrible rat king. This is actually a real thing, by the way. It's pretty gross, but in real life, rats are really social creatures that will help each other out with genuine altruism. In Warhammer, the Skaven are all awful, horrible beings, so the Horned Rat saw this merged flesh mass of 12 dudes who all hated each other and decided they would become his top guy. He blasted them with magic and their souls fused into one entity, Screech Vermin King, the greatest of the Verminlords. He hasn't done all that much, truth be told, but he has done two things of major importance. After being summoned by Thanquol during the end times, he helped our favorite rat drag Skavenblight into the realm of chaos, ensuring the Skaven would survive the end of the world. But before that, before they performed that ritual and pledged allegiance to Archaon and Chaos, Screech gave Thanquol the greatest gift one could ever imagine, a rat ogre, which Thanquol immediately named Bone Ripper. God bless you, Bone Ripper 40,000. You almost certainly were not long for the world. Now this is going to be a very impromptu do or don't mini-segment. Not really going in depth on anything, more so a general idea of what it's like bringing one of these to the table. For lore positives, a greater demon gives your army a real sense of threat and legitimacy. These are beings that can bring down entire empires and solar systems if given the chance, and the only thing that can regularly stand against greater demons are either the heaviest of weapons or named characters. When you deploy a greater demon, narratively your army isn't just fighting because chaos does that against other people. You and your patron god are fighting to win. They're also a sign that your army is at its most powerful, because greater demons rarely just happen. As much as there are places where demons can get into the real world with fairly minimal difficulty, these demons almost always only appear when Chaos's power is waxing strong. A greater demon isn't something that appears and is quietly dealt with. A greater demon is a sign that Chaos, at least in your area, is at the height of its power and will stop at nothing to take you down. Moving quickly on the tabletop positives, they of course all represent their chosen Chaos God's specialities, mechanically speaking as well. In 40k, Great Unclean Ones have the most wounds of the greater demons, buff friendly units' toughness, and debuff enemy units' toughness. Bloodthirsters are murderous in melee combat, Keepers of Secrets are the fastest, and even though the Psychic phase has been consigned to memory, Lords of Change have quite the impressive amount of magical Daka they can put out. In AOS, Keepers of Secrets give the enemy some buffs in exchange for upping their damage output, Great Unclean Ones can make the enemy diseased, Lords of Change have a potentially devastating, if highly random, damaging spell, and Bloodthirsters once again sure do hit real good. All greater demons are also pretty tough. In 40k they've all a 4-up invuln save, and in AOS all but the Lord of Change have a 4-up save. The Bird Boy only has a 5-up, but they do also have a 5-up ward save, which is something to help him stay alive. He's got 14 wounds still in AOS as compared to the 20 of a GUO or the 16 of Khorne and Slaanesh's demons, so he's still fairly beefy, and in 40k it's 18 wounds across the board except for the GUO, who also has 20 wounds here too. These guys will need a concentrated effort to bring them down, and while you should never play stupid with them, you can be safe in assuming they'll survive at least a round of combat against all but your enemy's hardest hitters. Or something like a gun line of 60 guardsmen in rapid fire range, but quite frankly very few things can survive that all pointed at them, so use terrain properly and that won't happen to you, you silly goose. I am speaking from personal experience, I miss my Warlock. Verminlords, meanwhile, all have the same stat line of 13 wounds and a 4-up save. Deceivers can do the teleports behind you trick, Corruptors can damage enemies and buff Pestilence units, Warbringers hit things real good like, and Warp Seers are good wizards with a nice amount of abilities and spells. The lore downsides of these guys is that if you lose, your army narratively is going to be spent for a bit. A greater demon requires time and effort to summon, and that's ignoring the fact that it's probably being summoned as part of a grander scheme that's also quite resource intensive. If you lose the tabletop match, narratively Chaos was defeated at its apex and is going to need to cool down for a while. No one likes a ruined climax, Slaanesh armies especially, but that's what a loss involving a greater demon is. Once they're deployed, it also usually means that Chaos is out of tricks and the grand finale is here. Your forces have done all the scheming they may care to or can do, the pieces are in place across the board, now it's showtime. This is either the game-winning play or the final Hail Mary to salvage something. Either way, it's all or nothing from here on out, so you'd best make that greater demon count. They're also not really something involved in smaller scale things, at least once they're out and about. They absolutely can be possessing and haunting lone people for some scheme, just chilling out in a dude's head. Even corn demons have been known to do that. But once a Bloodthirster or whatever is out on the battlefield, things are going down in a big way, and he's probably bringing friends. Scarbrand isn't going to be sneaking into a castle like Corvo from Dishonored, nor, quite frankly, any of the rest of the greater demons. So if you like smaller scale things narratively speaking, you're probably not going to want to include a greater demon in your force list. For tabletop downsides, as a whole greater demons suffer from the usual caveats of big models. You need to spend a hefty chunk of points to include them in your army, and your opponent is likely going to focus something hard-hitting on them due to their dangerous nature. This of course can be accounted for and turned against your opponent, but if nothing else, I've lost enough matches of 40k because my battle plan amounted to throw an Avatar of Cain at the opponent and pray for the best. If it dies, you're shit out of luck on a massive amount of points. This is less so in 40k because GW is turning every army into a horde army, but losing your 250 point Great Unclean one is still gonna hurt a little bit. Meanwhile, over in AOS, that same Great Unclean one is 480 points. So I hope you don't mind losing a quarter of your 2k point army if you got confident fighting Nagash and picked the wrong hand when he cast Hand of Dust. Beyond that, they do all have individual weaknesses. Bloodthirsters do admittedly have a ranged attack, but if it doesn't get into melee or gets into melee with something that can tie it up, it's frankly being wasted. Great Unclean ones are slow as shit, Lords of Change are fairly weak by greater demon standards with both their saves and wound counts, and a Keeper of Secrets can't put out nearly as many melee attacks as a Bloodthirster can, making choosing your targets well even more important. Verminlords meanwhile only have 13 wounds, which is funny. It's a real funny goof by GW, get it? Because it's the Skaven number. They are admittedly cheaper to balance things out, but come on, you couldn't even give the Warbringer 13 so he could at least be equal with the Lord of Change? That's just rude. And those are the greater demons of chaos. Scary, destructive, and a sign of your rapidly approaching demise. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the greater demons to my chaos, standing above all others in your power and magnificence. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. I know they're made out of warp stuff, but I really want to deep fry a Lord of Change. It would almost certainly not work, it would certainly kill and or mutate me if it somehow did, but I crave the warp fried chicken.